welcome to Frontier Opening Bell this Monday, the 6th of July, the first full trading week in the new month. I am Bosun Omofaye. Welcome to the show today, Chima Ukadike, who is a consumer goods analyst at Vertical Capital Management here in Lagos, Nigeria. Good morning, Chima.
Hi, good morning, Bosun.
Thanks for coming through. And from Nairobi in Kenya, Ali Kansachi, the CEO and founder of Rich Frontiers Management. Thank you very much, both of you. It's good to have you on the program today. Let's get the show started. Ali will talk more about the Pan-African market since the year started. But let's see how we finished up last week. The Nigerian market was in the red by nearly 2% for the week ended July the 3rd. The Ivorian market was down 0.14% on Friday. The Egyptian market finished 1.81%, a roaring coming back on Sunday, its first trading day for the week, looking at nearly 11,000 on the all-share index. Meantime, the Kenyan market was up 1.31%, 139.7, a shy of 140, while the South African JSE was up 0.17% on Friday, 54,521 reading on the all-share index. Take that away. Let's go to East Africa, where Ali will be speaking particularly to the Kenyan Airways issuing a cautionary trading notice as the nationalization of this airline looms and what is the fate of investors. Meantime, a raft of PMIs for the month of June, Kenya's manufacturing sector activity read 46.6 in the month of June, over 36.7 in the previous month. In Uganda, the PMI activity was up 46.5. Mozambique read 41.7, better than 40.0 in the month of May. All these numbers, however, still below the healthy 50.0 reading. Meantime, Friday was quiet on the Lusaka Stock Exchange. There was no trade on this exchange. Ali, take it from here.
So, Parson, just let me start with Kenya Airways. The cautionary trading notice essentially is suspended for 90 days. This is to give the government of Kenya time to table the offer to buy out not only KLM Air France, which has about 26% of the shares, but also minority shareholders in Kenya Airways. We knew this announcement was coming. We've discussed it on your show before. This is basically merging Kenya Airways with Kenya Airports Authority, and it's a restructuring of what is a very weak Kenya Airways balance sheet because of the accumulated losses we've seen over the last few years. This is a serious restructuring exercise. The share price had been recovering as people expected the government to pay a premium to the existing share price. And I think this is just an opportunity for the government to take 3 months to get everything together. So that's, I think, a net positive. KQ's been the best performing share at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. It had collapsed at the end of last year, so it was rebounding off the floor, but nevertheless, this is a positive story, an attempt to restructure the airline. Of course, today President Kenyatta will be announcing further developments around our lockdown, and there's a hope that the airline will also be reopening, but we await his announcement. Next door, Rwanda announced that from the 1st of August, they will be flying international flights. They, of course, got a clean bill of health from the EU because of their very strict quarantine against COVID, very low caseload. And of course, interestingly, there is a correlation with performance. The Rwanda Stock Exchange is the best performing stock market in dollar terms this year, up about 12.8%. We did see a raft of PMIs, as you correctly said, and you also correctly said 50 is the magic number. Below 50, we're still declining. The economy is not expanding. So it's good to see a recovery. The question is, can we push back over that key 50 level for Kenya, for Uganda, and for Mozambique? If I can just touch on two other important issues to the north of us in Kenya, Ethiopia, 166 people were reported as having lost their lives. This is after the assassination of this very iconic Oromo singer who had been singing about the rights of the Oromo, which are the biggest tribe in Ethiopia. And interestingly, the Prime Minister comes from that same tribe. But the Oromo themselves feel that Addis has suppressed them for a long time. So it's a very fragile situation, no internet access, very little reporting coming out of Addis, and we've got that issue swirling around about the dam as well, between the issue between Egypt and Ethiopia. So we're still waiting for further news from there. Let me leave you with one interesting point. The Malawian kwacha, as far as I can see, is the only currency in sub-Saharan Africa that has appreciated this year, up 4.4% year to date against the dollar. And I think that's interesting because there's a lot of optimism about this new president, an ex-pastor. He's really talking the talk. Everyone's excited. I know he had to cancel his inauguration because of a surge in COVID cases. But let's see how that develops. And finally, the South African market is actually down 27% in dollar terms, flat in terms of the actual index, just to give you an idea of how much the currency can hurt your returns or juice them, depending upon how the currency is doing.
Interesting stories around that corridor for us on the show. Thank you so much, Ali. Let's come to West Africa here, where Chima Okadike, the big story around the Nigerian market has to do with the exchange rate action taken by the financial regulator over the weekend. Meantime, starting from the top of the table, below the FX story, is the NSI, Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, reporting 36.15 billion naira in profits for the 2019 full year, and total assets to nearly 650 billion naira. Meantime, we're getting news of board meetings for the first half 2020 financials of some of the listed companies. Zenith Bank is likely to pay a half-year dividend according to a statement sent to the stock exchange over the finished week. Meantime, UBA, one of Nigeria's largest commercial banks, is holding an emergency meeting today and will brief the market and the regulators after that meeting. Meantime, SACOL, one of the airport operators in Nigeria, reported 16.5 covered dividend, cash dividend to shareholders, which was agreed at the annual meeting held about a few days ago for this company. We also have news from Seplat around its full half-year numbers that is expected in the course of the coming weeks. Meantime, the stock exchange released the listings that have been done on the exchange, whether they have rights or bonds or special purpose vehicles. Between March and June, despite the lockdown, companies were coming strongly on the Nigerian Stock Exchange to do billions and billions of listings on the market. Those numbers are really good, and you can find that online. Meantime, Ghana's First National Bank says it has completed a merger of its subsidiary, which is a mortgage lender, GHL Bank Limited of Ghana. Meantime, Nigeria Bua Cement says it's opening up 3,000 metric tons facility in Adamawa State, north of the country. For currency is the current denominator for all of this. That's where the Nigerian currency comes into play. Chima Okadike at Vetiver Capital, what's your take on central banks over the weekend's action?
Thank you, Basim. So we see this as one of the moves to unify the foreign exchange rates, as many international bodies have called for. We know that the central bank has been asked to do this to access, as part of the criteria or prerequisites to access some of these foreign loans and grants, which is much needed at this time. So we see this as a move towards that, a progression towards that. We also think, so from what news that we're getting, we are hearing that the central bank has been trying to prioritize local manufacturers over the PFIs in terms of allowing local manufacturers to be able to access FX for their imports. This is to help manufacturing and to help expansion in this trying time. However, we think that once this happens, when this, since we're getting towards the unification of the rates, when this happens, we'll see more transparency. People will be able to know what is going on in at the parallel markets and the I and EFX window, and we'll see that more foreign portfolio investors will likely try to leave the market as they have been trying to do. We've seen a decrease in their participation in the equities markets over the past months, given the broader macroeconomy that we have been facing. So we've been seeing a decline in their activity. We've been seeing that domestic investors have been trying to pull the market, and we see how the foreign investors have been trying to leave. However, because of the FX liquidity constraints, they haven't been able to do so. So we see this as a step. We think that when this happens, if this happens, and how quickly it happens, we're not certain yet. We think that the foreign portfolio investors would try to leave the Nigerian equity market as well as they can.
So we've seen the Nigerian market today. I'm sure the consumer play is very, very important. Consumer goods companies listed on the market, Nestle, Cadbury, Flour Mills, Dangote Sugar, and the rest of them, would also consider this FX rate action by the central bank one way or the other, isn't it, Chairman?
Yes, absolutely. So this play is very good for some of these companies that have been struggling to get FX to access their raw material imports. Although for so many of these companies, they've been able to push their backward integration play. For the industry average is around about 60 to 40 local sourcing to foreign sourcing. However, for some companies, for like Guinness, for example, we see that they're about 80%. Same with Nestle, they're about 80% local sourcing. However, they still have to source the remaining 20% outside the country, outside foreign raw materials. So the FX market is the exchange rate volatility is a very crucial factor in their operations at this time, especially given prices of raw materials at this time. So we think that this will be very, very vital to them as they are able to, if they are able to access it with priority, like we are hearing. So we think that this is a very good one for the consumer goods companies, and mostly because they make up most of the manufacturing sector. We think that we should be able to see some expansion in this sense when all these factors are able to come up positively.
Yeah, but maybe you talk about the backward integration of big names, but when you look at the SMEs who don't have that big what it takes to go on serious backward integration, then this FX story will be something important for them. Nestle can do 80-20. Nestle, Guinness can do that as well. But for those in the SME sector, they need these raw materials they can just get in to do their business. Looking at the level of our PMIs in the last couple of months. Thank you so much, Chima. Just a quick one. Let's move on to Southern Africa market and check in. Ali was touching on the JSE on the back footing in US dollar terms since the year started, but the country's factory activity leapt to 42.5, still in the water from the record low of 32.5 in the month of May. Meantime, the Reserve Bank is issued 3.45 billion rand to bail out CPDs over the losses sustained at Land Bank. In South Africa, sticking with that market, Capitec Bank sees 70% drop in first half 2020 earnings due to bad loans on the back of the coronavirus crisis. And Zambia's PMI rises to 42.3 in June from 34.8 in the month of May. Ali, where do you want to start from the SA story here? Is it a PMI? What's the story around South Africa's factory economy? This is the most advanced economy on the continent, the most industrialized.
You're absolutely right. So the most advanced and developed economy, bar none, across sub-Saharan Africa. So it's an important signal as to how that economy is performing. And I think that's a positive sign, given the context that we were in. This is now capturing a period where the lockdown was relaxed a little bit, and you're seeing a recovery. So I think investors will take some reasons for optimism from that number. The second story you had was about the land bank. The land bank is part and parcel of a number of SEOs in South Africa where the balance sheet really needs restructuring, and the Treasury has been in this fight about how much money to put to work. I saw over the weekend they were saying there's no more money available for South African Airways, but here clearly the land bank plays an important role in terms of redressing the wrongs from pre-apartheid period, trying to empower the non-white population in the agricultural sector. So I think that was an important national interest type issue. So they're obviously committed to that. Capitec, one of the fastest growing, most aggressive banks in South Africa. And as you would expect, given that we've had this lockdown, given that people's incomes have gone down, you were bound to expect a sharp slide in the half-year earnings. And I think that's just as we would have expected. The virus has hit balance sheets of individuals in particular. They're big lender to individuals, and I think that's a consequence of what we would expect given the scenario. But overall, there seems to be a lot of global optimism in the last 48 hours. The Chinese stock market has gone into a bull market as of today. There is a very big interconnection between South Africa and China, an economic one. And then just generally that positive spillover, I think, is spilling over into South African markets, and we could see a continued rally both in the Rand and in the JSE, which on a dollar basis, as we discussed just a minute ago, looks very, very cheap to me.
Interesting, Ali, about the southern markets on the continent. Let's check in with the northern African region as we get to wrap up the show. This was the story, is the big stories from Egypt. The Suez Canal says its 2019-2020 revenue dipped to $5.72 billion because the global supply chain has been greatly disrupted since the beginning of the year. So Suez Canal, which is a major logistics company on the books of in this Egyptian space, reported a decline in revenue. Meantime, the Indonesia Albania Industries starts trading its shares on auctions from today, and Algeria cuts what the World Bank cuts Algeria to lower bracket income country ranking because the per capita is now around $3,970. Meantime, the Moroccan market finished off the week 0.21% in the Pacific region, and the Casablanca ESG 10 up slightly on Friday. Ali, give me just a second here around the Egyptian story for the Suez Canal.
So what's happened with the Suez Canal, Boyason, is a lot, because the price of fuel has dropped so sharply, a lot of ships are actually not going through the Suez Canal. They're coming all the way around the bottom of South Africa and then going to those places on the eastern side. So it's really a function of the price of fuel and the fact that ships have decided, logistically speaking, that they're just as well off going this longer distance around the Cape of Good Hope. So that's, I think, a specific situation to do with traffic flows, which has seen the Suez Canal take the brunt of that traffic flow change. I haven't sort of modeled the situation. I suppose if we get higher fuel prices, people will prefer to take the shorter journey, but let's see how that develops. It's a function of that. If I can just quickly touch on Algeria, obviously a very wealthy country in terms, when you compare that number 3,970 to parts of Africa, you know, they're clearly very well to do, but There's been a massive
ahead of Nigeria.
Ahead of Nigeria, but there's been a massive rundown in FX reserves, and until now they've been fending off asking the IMF or the World Bank for any help. So we will keep an eye on that situation. They've obviously built this wonderful road that everyone's talking to me about, connecting West Africa to Algeria. I don't know if you saw that. I saw some photographs recently. And just finally touching on Morocco, I think Morocco is important geoeconomically. In this uncertainty around North Africa, with Libya in a lot of problems, I think increasingly Morocco strikes me as a situation which is going to be very interesting from a geoeconomic perspective, and therefore it might very well find itself in a kind of sweet spot because of those geoeconomic situations playing in their favor.
Interesting here. So let me just ask, thank you, Ali. Let me ask Chinma to give us about a minute. What's your thoughts on this week's trading action on our Nigerian market space? What's your outlook? What's your playbook here for the week?
Thank you very much, Boston. So for our outlook for the week, I was going to give an outlook for Q3 if I could. Well, but just for coming from last week, we saw 3 negative sessions and just 2 positive sessions. We saw our market dip by about 1.9%. We know the reason for this dip and the reason for the bearish sentiment. We also think that not too far off, very soon we'll be getting results from the H1 results from some of these companies, from some of the companies on the NSE, and we don't expect the results to be good. We don't expect to see very positive results, especially going by Q1 results and then going by what we have seen in the economy in Q2. So we expect, also we saw last week Guinness put out a statement to say that investors should expect a poor performance in their full year results based on the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on them. We expect many other companies to, although we believe that Guinness's performance is basically majorly because of its location in the brewery sector, which is said to be one of the worst hit sectors. But we see that many of these companies will follow suit in this manner in terms of the poor results we'll be expecting. So we expect investors to really just be wary and just be guarded and wait for the results to come out. We expect cautious trading for the rest of the week. Also, we see that this is a very good time, or we think that it's a good time for long-term investors to take a play, to take positions in the market, given the beat downs of many of these stocks. We expect that since we do not expect the coronavirus to stay for a long time, we expect some recovery at some point in the market. We are just uncertain as to when. So for long-term investors, we see this as a good time to take a play. Also, we expect that the banking sector will be a good play for investors. We have seen that that sector has really kind of withstood the hits that we have been seeing for the market. We also expect to see some play in the telecom sector, maybe MTN. We expect to see investors go for, bargain hunts on those stocks. Also, we are expecting to see maturities, heavy maturities this Q3. So for the total of Q3, we expect about 2.8 trillion in maturities from the fixed income market. We note the supply problem we have in the NCD markets. We note the restrictions to local investors in the OMO market, as well as the long-term requirements in the bond market. So we think that some of these maturities will be plugged into the equity market from these fixed income guys. So that's our outlook for 1 week and Q3.
Great. It's a whole lot to pack into the quarter and the week, but we're just getting started. So let's see how all of this pays out today, the rest of the week, and down the rest of the quarter. Thank you so much. Let's leave it there for today.
Thank you.
Chima Ukadike, the consumer analyst, consumer goods analyst at Betiba Capital Management Limited. Thank you so much. And of course, Ali Kansachu. Thank you so much. CEO and founder of Rich Frontiers Management. Thank you both, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Do have a great day, everyone.